Chapter 21, Theology versus Anthropology. What's this chapter about? Well, some of the most famous names in what we might call the social sciences, such as political theory, psychoanalysis, sociology, have been some of the most vociferous critics of religion. Karl Marx, religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature. Or Freud, Sigmund Freud, who confidently predicted the end of religion and its disappearance as maturity and an understanding of the way the human mind works would be disseminated and become more common. In the case of all these subjects, the social sciences, again, I would suggest that there's a false opposition between their discoveries and their insights and the proper object of theology. But be that as it may, it might be good to look at a couple of the critiques that are afforded by social scientific contributors, and maybe look at the sort of response that Christian theology has offered to them. One of Marx's problems with Christianity was that in proposing another world, it served to distract people from their task, which arguably is a very gospel-centered task, to change the world that they live in. One would have to say, maybe he had a point. The hostility of later communism to the practice of religion does not really should not deflect from the proper critique offered by Marx to theologians of every stripe, that theology which doesn't have a relevance in life, as Wittgenstein later would say, theology is about life. If it's about anything, it's a language game that's about life. So, a fair critique. Feuerbach, another interesting thinker, connected to the same period of German philosophical and political activity of the 19th century. He famously critiqued, almost reversed Anselm's ontological argument, and said that what we really have in the notion of God is a projection of our best selves, that it's a projection of humanity drained of its imperfections. Again, quite an intriguing thought, and one worth wrestling with, and one worth addressing in a theological fashion. Freud, Sigmund Freud, the famous discoverer of the subconscious, and the one who attempted to unpick the motivations we won't even admit in ourselves of our actions. He surmised in a somewhat complicated chain of reasoning that religious instincts and the worship of God was connected to primeval tribal behaviour, whereby maybe the head of a tribe was bested and killed by younger aspirants to authority, and that somehow this was transmogrified into an ancestor worship, which ultimately became worship of an eternal ancestor, an ancient of days, a worship of God. Intriguing theories, etc. But as if to prove that psychology or sociological investigations are not inimical in themselves to theological reflection, one only has to look at Freud's own colleague and sometime disciple, Carl Jung, who began to explain motivation and human behaviour almost against a background of a collective religious sense, that in some ways it was religion that was cohering principle and the ultimate driver, rather than the sexual libido that Freud attributed much of our behaviour to. Likewise, a voice connected to psychology and psychoanalysis came from the concentration camps, surely one of the worst examples of humanity's inhumanity to itself, with the work of Viktor Franklin, noted as a medical doctor incarcerated in the camps, that those prisoners with something to live for survived the best. You've noticed that someone would live until their birthday and then die. No particular reason why they didn't die 2 days before, but it seemed to him, and he explored it later as a practitioner of psychotherapy, that it's man's search for meaning that is the key to his well-being, ultimately underpinning our sense of purpose. The reason we might get up of a morning is the idea that we are making a difference and there are things to live for and that it's worthwhile. And it's that confluence, really, of search for meaning and ultimate meaning that it, to some extent, is explored in this chapter. It's looking at the way in which theology's search for meaning conflates, I should say, it's integrated, knits together with these more generic studies of human behaviour and human attitudes, human psychology, human social behaviour, human's political aspirations. Are they enemies or are they friends? Do they connect or are they fundamentally opposed? I'll leave the answer to that to you.